Hey everybody, welcome back to Deep Roots. Here on the podcast today, we have Matt Tinch and myself, Jake Ferguson. And today we're really going to be going into a passage that many of us are probably going to be very familiar with. It's going to be found in Matthew chapter 22.
Yep.
And really, Jesus is tested. And what we get out of this is the greatest summarization of the law.
Yeah.
And so we're just going to dive right into it,
Yeah,
and we're going to talk about it. So what we have here is we have Matthew chapter 22, and it's going to be in verses 34 through 40. And so we're going to briefly read through that, and then we're going to spend some time. We're going to talk about that. We're going to kind of look at the who, what, when, where, why, how, and really kind of see what was going on in that time when the question was posed, what is the greatest commandment? And so let's go ahead and dive right in. So starting in verse 34, but when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they had gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. There's a lot being said there in just a few short verses.
Yeah, a lot going on.
There is a lot going on, and it's worthy of our time and is worthy of our attention. But today we're really going to kind of cover down on a couple things regarding this question that this lawyer poses to Jesus. And so with that being said, Matt kind of explained to us a little bit what's going on here. Where is Jesus? Who's asking Jesus this question, and why is that even important?
Yeah, well, around this time, you started to see different messianic movements kind of pop up. Mm-hmm. And so there's different reasons for why they asked the question. But what we have going on here is we identify who's there, like who's the parties involved. And so we have the Sadducees, which the verse had referred to after he had silenced them prior, and that was when they had asked him, the custom of the day was when, if you had a brother and you died, then your wife was to marry your brother. And they said, well, what about this family? It's got 7 brothers, and she marries all the brothers, and they all catch COVID or something, and then one dies off right after the other. So whose wife will she be in the afterlife? And they said, well, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be like the angels, where we're not given to marriage in the afterlife. And so it was a profound answer, and one that made sense to them, something they probably hadn't thought about before. And so Jesus had put the Sadducees to shame. He silenced them.
He did.
So now the Pharisees take their turn. And you got to remember, in this setting, they was probably in the temple court where crowds of people had gathered around. Jesus, by this time, had gained a following.
So this was public. This was in a public setting where if Jesus were to fail this test, then it would have been a spectacle.
Yeah, and that's what they were trying to do. They, lawyers get a bad rap a lot of the times, most of the time for good reasons, but not all the time. But they were trying to set him up in a trap. And so you have the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the crowd, and then obviously Jesus himself. This is taking place Jesus' last week before the crucifixion. Remember, if you do, Palm Sunday had happened where Jesus had entered into Jerusalem through great fanfare, people throwing down their palms and all that kind of stuff, riding in on the donkey. This was probably on Tuesday, right before the crucifixion, where, there's several concerns that they had, but just to kind of go off your basic question to start us off with, that's kind of the setting that everything's taking place in. To go further with it, I don't know if you had something you wanted to go off of there.
No, I think it's interesting, though, that you address the crowds because, it's one thing if the Pharisees and the Sadducees were really the only ones present, but it seemed like there was malice behind this. There had to have been, because if this was all public, this was if he were to fall, this would be a public spectacle. Obviously, there was some malicious intent behind that.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting to note.
Yeah, and you got to know at the time, you're basically dealing with an illiterate culture. And the Sadducees and the Pharisees, experts in the law, were really well-educated, very learned individuals. And so the gap between the crowd and then the Pharisees and the Sadducees was monstrous. I mean, like, one of these Pharisees or one of these Sadducees could have outwitted your average crowd member over any issue, whether they were right or whether they were wrong, just by the nature of their linguistic ability, what they understood about the written word, how they understood reasoning. They would debate among themselves, and so they were really good at understanding the written word, how to interpret it, how to kind of divine deep meaning out of it, and then how to use that verbally to get what they wanted or to make their point, to put it in a less malicious way. If they had felt strongly about a particular topic, biblical topic, this is something that they probably would have debated amongst themselves. And of course, I guess one of the qualifiers that's important to note is the difference between the Pharisee and the Sadducee. I know that for a large portion of my life, I kept hearing about Sadducees and Pharisees without really knowing what the difference was between them. Of course, they both are the religious elite. The Sadducees are the ones who controlled the temple, but true. They didn't believe in an afterlife.
Okay.
So that's kind of like where you see the insight there as to why was the Sadducees asking about the resurrection. Well, because they didn't believe.
They didn't believe
in a resurrection.
Correct. Which is why they were sad.
Right. That's why he's sad. You see, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. But see, it's that kind of thing that, like, if you're just reading over the verse, you might miss that. But it gives you a little bit of insight into the psychology behind the question. Why are they asking this question? Right? Because they felt secure in their belief that there was no resurrection. And so in order to try to trip Jesus up prior to that, they want to kind of formulate this, what they would see as an impossible question to answer. And so Jesus leaves them dumbfounded. And so he deals with the Sadducees, and now he moves on to the Pharisees, who now, they step up to the plate saying, okay, yeah, those guys, they're Sadducees. They're not like us. We believe in the resurrection. We know the law better. Let me ask you this question, Jesus. Now, of all the laws and all the prophets, what's the greatest commandment? That seems like a difficult question for the average person. Like, well, it's all the Word of God.
Yeah.
It's all the law. What do you mean, the greatest commandment? And Jesus, quite skillfully in front of this crowd, in this court, after he's entered into much fanfare, and have no doubt, they want to take Jesus down for a variety of reasons. One, within the Jewish culture, of course, they're under Roman occupation at the time. The Sadducees and the Pharisees had immense control over the Jewish population there. So the Sadducees had the control of the temple, but the Pharisees, they knew the law better. And so they were afraid that somebody like Jesus was a threat to their own authority.
Yeah.
They also, I think you could give some of them the benefit of the doubt. Of course, we know from the biblical text there were some among them who saw Jesus for who he was.
Right. Secret disciples by night and so forth.
Yeah. And so some of them may have genuinely wanted to see if this is the Messiah, then there's nothing going to be too difficult for him to answer in whatever question we come up with. However difficult it may seem to us or the crowd, the Messiah surely won't have an issue with it. And so I think we can give some of them the benefit of the doubt that they were genuinely seeking for validation of who Jesus claimed to be. And so they was afraid that as a consequence, given their idea of who the Messiah would be, they were expecting a political dictator that would overthrow Rome and set up God's kingdom on earth in Jerusalem. And you would have like a world court where the Sanhedrin would kind of rule and all that kind of stuff. And, you get pieces of this in different parts of Scripture where the disciples, they argue among themselves, like, what position am I going to have in heaven?
Who's going to be the greatest?
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. And so as a result, the Romans weren't ignorant of the Jewish faith. And so if they thought maybe the Messiah had come, they may have feared a Roman crackdown because, they're even at Jesus' birth, Herod, he wanted to find out, hey, come tell me who the Messiah is.
So I can go and worship.
I want to worship him too, So there might have been, some fear that the Romans then would increase the strictures, so to speak, that they would have had on them at the time. So fear to their authority, a fear of Roman kind of increased pressure.
Yeah.
Maybe some of them wanted to know, hey, is this really the Messiah? And so how did they do it? Well, what you have here is what is presented as a theological question. But that's not what it was. It was something that they thought in their own mind, this is going to trap him. Because there's really not a good answer to this.
Right.
But if we can get him there saying, well, if you think about this law or that law or whatever, but Jesus does something brilliant here. And as an attorney, you realize that because oftentimes, even in modern legal discussions, if you look at law reviews, like the journals, the legal journals where people debate different legal issues and stuff like that, or you look at some of the Supreme Court decisions and stuff like that that's taken place. You look to our founding documents. How did they come up with these laws? Well, Jesus points to something very critical about the law, which is, why is the law there in the first place? What's the issue that they're trying to tackle? And so oftentimes in American jurisprudence, what you'll often have is, like, this is the law. Somebody has to interpret it. And the Supreme Court is the court of last resort. And so then what they will do is they'll go back to sometimes when the law was formulated, and they'll go back to what was the founders or what was the intent behind the law?
Correct.
What sources were they drawing from? All of these things give you insights into what the purpose and therefore the application should be of the law itself. So what Jesus does is, in quite a brilliant way, of course, him being the Messiah, is he shows this lawyer, this very educated, well-learned attorney that's very good with the written word, very good at deciphering meaning out of words, and has been studying the law his whole life.
Yeah.
He shows him that not only does he know, does he have a knowledge of the law, but he knows what the law is for.
Correct.
He knows what it's there
the
for.
intent and the purpose behind the law and exactly what it was that it was trying to accomplish and stuff. Yeah.
And so that way, Jesus comes out not only as the legal expert here, but really kind of the author of the law.
I like that you went there, not only because he is the word, the written word, but also not only is he the authority of that, but he's also the one who came and fulfilled it.
Yes.
At the same time.
Right. Yeah.
And so, it's interesting. I look back at the response that Jesus gave. A lot of times when Jesus was answering or responding back to a question, many times he would answer the question with a question.
Yeah.
Or he would remain silent, stoop down, and write his fingers in the sand. He would not give an immediate response. But in this text, was really interesting to note is he is very quick on the draw. Love God, love people. I mean, he is succinct. I mean, he is just crisp about it. There's no beating around the bush. There's no giving them time to think about it. It's almost like checkmate.
Yeah. Well, it's a good question.
It is a good question.
It's a good question because you have the moral law, the ceremonial law, and the ritualistic?
I believe so.
Is it ceremonial? There's.
I wasn't ready for this exam.
Yeah, there's. And we can cut this up, but there's the ceremonial, the moral law, and then the dietary law.
Oh, dietary restriction.
So I'll start back on that.
Sorry.
Okay. So it's a good question. It's a good question because, the law itself was divided in three categories. There was the moral law, there was the ceremonial law, and then the dietary law.
Yeah. All
of them, apparently, God breathed. So how do you pick one that's more important than the other? Right. Well, Jesus, he points to specific laws here, one from Deuteronomy and one from Leviticus.
Yeah.
So he cites specific examples, but he cites to specific examples that give the heart or the intent behind the law. All of the law, Jesus, says in essence that all the law and the prophets is for this one point.
Yes.
Is that you were created and your number one job is to magnify the name of the Lord, right? To worship the Lord. And so The number one thing in your life, in my life, anybody else's life that's watching this, is that you are to love the Lord, your God, with all your heart, mind, soul, strength.
That's with every faculty of your being.
Everything you've got.
Not on Sundays.
No.
Not just on Sundays.
Right.
Not just on Facebook.
Yes.
Not just in your evening meals when you say grace.
Yes.
But literally in every faculty of your being, your thoughts, your rationale, your responses, when no one is watching. Everything of who a person is. You are to love God with all of that.
Yeah. There's nothing off the table. Right. So God, we're told in the scriptures, he's numbered the hairs on your head.
Yeah.
He's woven you together in your mother's womb. He knows everything about you, and he's interested in everything about you. And you were created for relationship. And so, so many times in our lives, when we find ourselves the most distant from God, it's not always the case. It doesn't mean that if you're a good Bible student and you pray like you should and you serve like you should, that you're never going to have hardships. But generally speaking, when we run into the most difficult circumstances in our life, it's when we're the furthest away from God. And God allows those things to come into our lives because, like the prodigal son who finds himself in the pig trough, it's at rock bottom oftentimes when we realize I've tried every self-help guru. I've gone to my psychologists. I've got all the SSRIs. I've got all the, whatever.
Yeah.
I've tried everything in the world except turning to God. And it's at that point where we come back to God, and then there's like this restoration that takes place, and it's beautiful, and God loves brokenness, and he loves broken vessels. And that's why the apostle says that we should take pride or glory in our weaknesses.
Absolutely.
Because it's when we are weak that God can show off the most. It doesn't mean that you're going to be Kanye West or whatever. It doesn't mean that you're going to, be a millionaire or all your problems are going to go away or you're going to all of a sudden be handsome or whatever. It just means that God can do anything he wants to, and he can do it through any vessel he wants to. Yeah. And he wants the one that's going to say, "Here am I, Lord, send me to do whatever it is." And so whether it's the music you listen to, even the food you eat, the people you surround yourself with, what you let, come into your eyes, what you watch, everything matters. And I mean everything, from how you present yourself, how you dress yourself. Everything matters to God. And that all is to be devoted to the magnifying of his name, of who he is. And then the second commandment plays off of that idea.
You're right. And I love that you went there, because you can't have one without the other, and one has to happen first. And I think what's interesting to note with really Jesus' response is he gives these two statements, love God and love people. He gives these statements in an order.
Yeah.
So if Jesus says it in that order, that is the order in which it is priority, because we cannot properly love people or our neighbor as ourselves if we first can't even love God with all of our faculty,
That's right.
with all of our being, with everything that we are. And, I think where kind of this checkmate comes in is, you can really kind of break down the 10 commandments really into two parts. And those two parts is the first 4 commandments are our relationship toward God.
Yeah.
Whereas the last 6 commandments is our relationship towards people.
Mm-hmm.
And so he summarizes the law in 2 statements because it's focusing on really 2 outside agencies. First one being God above, and then the people around us.
Yeah.
And so in today's discussion, really the focus was loving God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And, next week, as we really kind of get into, loving our neighbor as ourselves, we're going to go more into that next week. But today, we're talking about loving God and knowing that we truly cannot love our neighbor as ourselves. We can't even love ourselves right.
Yeah.
Unless and until we understand how God first loves us. Then we can truly love him.
Yeah.
And then we can truly love those around us. And I really just love how Jesus is just like, this, love God, love people. And it was a checkmate. It's this. And where the lawyer was trying to silence him and trap him, Jesus easily kind of turns it back on them.
Yeah, and it's a true sign of intelligence. I mean, If you can take something complicated and simplify it and wrap it all up in a sentence, like he does, that shows a command over the material that otherwise people struggle to grasp. And so I think it like you mentioned, he doesn't answer it with a question. He doesn't pause. He doesn't stay silent. He immediately, in a proactive sense, answers the specific question.
Yeah, it goes right for the throat.
And he takes something that's very complicated,
Yeah.
all the law and the prophets. Think about all that includes.
Yeah.
All the law, all the prophets, all that happened within that. And this right here is the greatest commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. To be able to take all of that and put it together may have not been something that anybody had ever tried to do before. And it was probably profound for them to hear it themselves.
I totally agree. He made it sound so simple that it's like, you know the law so well, but you really don't know anything.
Yeah.
And that's humbling. That's very humbling. And it's very challenging for us as well. And so, I think it's just really ironic and also insulting towards the one who asked him that question. And it truly demonstrated that in that amazing answer and response that he gave so quickly is, I am the Word.
Yeah.
And what you're reading in the law is me.
Yeah.
And I also came and I fulfilled that law.
Yeah, just think of
as
how
well.
ironic it is that he's asking Jesus.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Like, you can do so much mental gymnastics there with that. And we won't go into that today. One day, we'll probably get into, Jesus being the Word. But I really want us to kind of understand, as we were talking about Matthew 22 today, and really his response to that trap question of what we're trying to accomplish here with deep roots. And what we really want is, do we spend time in the text and really just ask those questions? We ask the who, what, when, where, why, how. We ask, well, why is this important? Who's the difference between these two characters, Sadducees and the Pharisees? And why is that even important? Well, by understanding, kind of knowing who these two different parties are, we can know a lot more behind this whole situation and why it's that much more important. And by knowing that more of that information, more of that context, more of the characters that are involved, we can really kind of bring what's just black and white on the page into a 3D picture. And so as we kind of talk about that today, and Matt, I really thank you. I really thank you for divulging into that and opening that up for us today, and I think you did a really good job with that. And, as you are listening here today, I hope that it has kind of encouraged you and maybe even cultivated an interest that maybe was never there before of as you look at the black and the white on the page, by asking those questions, and it can really paint that picture and cultivate an interest to really investigate more, so that we're not knowing just more about God, but we know God more. And that is the difference. That's what we're trying to accomplish here, so that on a daily basis, you're growing in your thirst and your desire to know God more, not just know more about God. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope it blessed you as much as it blessed us. And really, the goal here is just to help encourage and cultivate more of an interest with you guys who are listening, to really have that thirst and that desire to get into the Word yourself and to spend that time with the Lord, to listen to the Lord. And the best way to listen is really to listen to what He has already spoken in the written Word. And so, guys, tune in next time here on the Deep Roots Podcast. We hope that you are blessed. We'll see you next time.